Hey there, and welcome back to Transformers Fall of Cybertron! As you recall, in the last episode, I compared the SP skeletons with the MP parts for the Dinobots and the Insecticons. And now, we're going to run through the remaining Skelmesh characters that exist throughout the game. Well, at least the ones that are compatible with the standard character rig, anyway. Now, even though by default, none of these characters work with FOC's part-based system, they can, nonetheless, be swapped over a specific character's part and be used in the customization menu. This can be done in the exact same way as the high-res Kaon parts that I covered in my AI parts video. So refer to that video if you need a reminder on what to do. Well, we've got quite a few Skelmeshes to go through here, so we're just gonna have to get this show rolling. Let's get to it! We'll start by going through a few rare AI skeletons. Most of these meshes are blink and you miss 'em types that only show up in specific levels. Up first, we have the SoldierCarAutLo. This wretched thing is typically used as a Vig corpse in Optimus Prime's levels. His most noteworthy appearance, though, is near the beginning of Chapter 2, right after the first warp cannon lands. His body can be seen flying to the side as you make your first turn into the Iacon ruins. So, there's a couple key points to make about this guy. First off, he looks like a port from a Nintendo DS game. Having a single mere 256 by 256 texture for his entire body will do that to you. Which leads to my second point, he only has one texture. A single diffuse texture for his entire body. So that means he has no masks for his energon, custom colors, nor even any normals to cook in for some extra detail. Generally speaking, he has the same proportions of the standard Autlo soldier, just with a lot of the extra armor and parts removed. Starting up with the head, which is noticeably uncolored, he is missing his ears and the rear panel on the back of his head. Otherwise, it's about the same mesh-wise. Moving down to the chest, his secondary colored armor sections are noticeably missing color. He is also missing both the front ab parts and his rear energon nodes. I'll also note that his upper parts are strangely colored cyan. That's an interesting twist. Not sure what's up with that. The shoulders have the same deal going down. All additional parts not part of the base mesh have been removed. Same can be said of the arms. And also the legs, which are most notably missing their top thigh armor. So yeah, in a nutshell, it's a flat, bland version of the standard Autobot soldier. Not someone you'll ever likely to be messing around with unless you're just digging through the game's files like I am. Anyway, continuing down the line of obscure AI characters, we have SoldierCarDecLo, not to be confused with the WFC character with the same name. This character, much like the previous Autobot model, is incredibly rare and incredibly low quality. In fact, this guy only appears once in the entire game. He is found in Chapter 11, Starscream's Betrayal, as a vignette character operating a console above the room that will close a shutter around him should you attempt to attack him. His texture resolution is slightly bigger than the Autobots, coming in at 512 by 512 for the entire model, though he does fully support all the proper FOC color masks, so it's not just a flat diffuse texture like the bot was. And though you can't see it while he's in-game, his diffuse portion of the texture is slightly different compared to the standard Car Soldier. His entire armor has a blue tint to it, his energon veins are actually colored red as opposed to the standard purple, and his visor is actually colored blue as opposed to the standard red. None of these traits are visible while in-game, but it is quite the curious change for this model. Anyway, as far as any actual mesh differences go, the back of the chest is missing all of the spare rear armor that is meant to be a duplicate of Blastoff's front armor, and from the front he's missing some of the spare side armor right above his hips. I will also highlight that his caps are fully textured, compared to the standard low version of the soldier, which was missing the actual texture for the inner portion of his cap edge. The arms have been slightly slimmed down, with the inner armor sections being completely removed, and he's also missing the diamond-shaped armor above his fingers. For the legs, he's missing a lot of his spare armor. He's missing the round parts on the side of his thighs, the knee pad armor, his lower side knee armor, and his foot armor has been substantially condensed. Yeah, overall, nothing too special to mention about this guy. Well, let's continue on to yet another AI character. Taking a blast from the past, we have the Decepticon Car Soldier. This is the iconic soldier from War for Cybertron, and is a straight port from the game. Which is understandable considering how messed up the rig is. Yeah, the majority of war-based characters will not translate over properly due to differences on how FOC and WFC rig their characters. While some may translate over better than others, most will become malformed, as you can see here. This guy, as far as I can tell, never actually is used anywhere in the game, despite being included in several packages. He seems to be mostly a package mate alongside another WFC variant, which we'll cover shortly, but never shows up in the game on his own to my knowledge. Instead of having all his main textures, aside from the grunge, be 1024 by 1024, the parts from the vehicle mode, the wheels and back panel, have the appropriate resolution for all their textures, except for the spec def loom texture, which is now 512 by 512. So those particular sections are going to look a bit more smudgy compared to the original WFC model. Other than that, nothing particularly of interest here. Continuing with another war-based character, we have the SoldierCarDecLo. This guy, compared to the previous model, was actually fully ported over to FOC and works just fine on his own. He seems to most closely resemble the Vidge Decepticon Soldier from the beginning of K-On! Prison Break, and is most commonly found in Chapter 2, Defend the Ark, at the flight deck, loading Energon, where Megatron's hologram is encountered. He also has a brief cameo in Grimlock Smash, where he is doing a happy dance before quickly getting offed by a falling Grimlock. So sad. There are a few slight differences, though. Mainly, the color of this guy is the same as the standard Decepticon Soldier, as opposed to the blue one seen in War, and his visor is actually red, as opposed to the glowing purple he had in War. Mesh-wise, though, the proportions have been adapted slightly to fit the FOC rig. Mainly that his head is slightly bigger in the FOC port, but other than that, though, the only real differences between this and the standard Car Soldier are the lack of wheels on the shoulders, and the back section does not have part of the vehicle mode on it. So again, nothing too special going on here. Up next, we have quite the peculiar one, SoldierJetAut. Yep, another return from War for Cybertron that is used in the most bizarre way possible. Now, if you're like me, you've probably never even seen this guy in the game at any point in your life. In fact, what he's actually assigned to will no doubt surprise you. Turns out this guy is used as the robot mode for the, wait for it, Autobot Titan's Sentry Orbs. Yeah, I'm dead serious. One can only speculate why of all things the devs went with this for the robot mode for such an obscure enemy, but they did. Well, anyway, that aside, visually the model is a straight port of the WFC version, sans the legs, which are loaded on as a destructible by the game, and were never part of the main model. At least not the main enemy model. Really, the only points of note here are his primary and secondary colors, which are now cyan and red, as opposed to the standard white and red. And aside from the broken skeleton due to the WFC rig, there's not a whole lot more to mention here. So, let's jet on to our next skeleton, who is quite the popular one. War for Cybertron Megatron. This Megatron, as you know, appears in both of Prime's levels, once as a hologram in Defend the Ark, then as a featured character in his own cinematic at the end of Metroplex Heeds the Call. So, there's actually quite a few interesting tidbits to mention about this guy. First and foremost, he is not a straight port of WFC Megatron, as you may think. His textures, while generally straight ports from WFC, do differ slightly in regards to their resolution. His def spec loom, or main texture, is half the size of his War one, being only 1024 by 1024. Interestingly though, his grunge has actually doubled in size. Instead of being the standard 512 by 512, it is now 1024 by 1024. This was likely done to make all his textures the same resolution. Now, moving on to the model itself, Megatron has had several areas adjusted to support the FOC rig. But on top of that, he's also received some very substantial work on his head. The head alone is actually made from free materials. the standard material, which is used for the base head armor, and 2 more that actually use a whole new FOC material. It turns out they actually made a whole new head texture that they sadly only used part of, that being his neck. It is somewhat sharper compared to the war one, since he doesn't have to share it with any other part of him, and it is now rigged to have proper teeth instead of a simple glowing mouth, as the majority of war characters have. In addition to that, he has a furred material for his neck, which is shared with the FOC Megatron. Another interesting change can be spotted on his left shoulder. It seems that they slightly scaled down and moved his right sharp kibble. I can only guess this is because it may have caused some issues with the new rig. I can't say that for certain, but that's the only reason I can think of. Finally though, WFC Megatron is actually completely missing his interior material for all his inner parts. It likely won't be noticeable unless you're right up close to it, but if you examine him carefully, you'll likely notice a few areas that just don't look quite right. His legs being a good example. But, those issues aside, he works perfectly fine with the FOC rig and is a fascinating observation nonetheless. Up next, we have Little Rumble.
Hey! Who are you calling little?
So, Rumble actually has 2 models included in the game. The original War for Cybertron model, which we'll cover shortly, and the new one you see here, which is actually completely compatible with the new FOC rig. His most noteworthy difference is his new blue-purple color scheme compared to his original blue and black, which I'm honestly a bit more partial to. That, and he has a completely new texture set, also based upon FOC's texture styling. And strangely enough, I can find literally no differences between the 2 models at all. Visually, at least. Certainly we know the rigs are different, but I can't find even the slightest of proportional changes anywhere. That is quite curious. But since there really isn't anything else to mention here, I guess we'll just take a look at his WFC model. So here we have War for Cybertron Rumble, who appears most notably in Chapter 10, The Final Countdown, where you meet up with Soundwave right before he brings down the first gate into Iacon. As you can clearly tell, he is not as well put together as the previously covered FOC model. That's because this is a straight port of the WFC model, and even though the models are straight up identical, visually you can clearly see what effect rigging has on the model. And outside of having a lower resolution for his textures, like WFC Megatron, there are no other differences to mention here. So we'll quickly rush on to Rumble's brother, Frenzy. Frenzy, once again, is a straight-up port of the WFC model, with all the same traits and characteristics of Rumble. Same colors as his WFC appearance, same lower texture resolutions, same broken rig. Yeah, there really isn't much to cover with this guy either. I don't know why they didn't bother porting an FOC version of Frenzy over like they did for Rumble. Shouldn't be that hard of a task to do, since Rumble is virtually an identical mesh in regards to ports. Making a version of Frenzy should be trivial. Well, anyway, I won't waste any more time on this guy. Let's leap on to our next character, the Decepticon Leaper. We all remember these wisecracked jumpers. He most prominently appears in Optimus Prime's levels, but makes several more appearances throughout the game. The Leaper is made from entirely unique parts, and despite being a scale model, he is completely compatible with the standard FOC rig. A nifty little fun fact, though, is that the Leaper doesn't technically have a head. Yeah, sure, he's got that triangular lens section up there, but technically speaking, that isn't his head. It is rather assigned to his chest, which is quite strange, but I just wanted to throw that out there. Anyway, the rest of his parts are pretty generic, though, with there being a couple standouts. His chest is pretty simple from the front, but his most iconic sections are on the back. Those being his massive thrusters protruding from his back. Honestly, this is probably my favorite part of this guy. Both the front and the back look crazy cool. His shoulders are just simple round hubs with nothing too noteworthy to mention. Though another high point is his arms. He's got these massive blades lining the back that also come with their own thruster. This dude was just made to deliver an impact. And finally, we have his legs, which are pretty simple looking pieces that I honestly still do wish we had gotten as individual parts, but alas, we did not. Well, that's all I've got for the Leaper. Let's switch it up for a real treat. Everyone's favorite lever-based transformer, Leverboy. This dancing switch appears solely in Chapter 5, Cut and Run, as an Easter egg that dances the Carltons and blows open a secret area loaded with a whole bunch of goodies. Leverboy, as you can no doubt tell, is made primarily from Rumble, with the chest of the lever object of which he gets his color scheme from. It is worth noting that I had to do some texture work for this guy, as the way his materials work have both his primary and secondary colors the same color. So to support the fully yellow body but keep the dark lever color as well, I made all the Rumble pieces use the primary color to demonstrate him properly. The only mesh difference I can spot are that his cap sections have been slightly enlarged, and the rest of him is just a solid copy of Rumble/Frenzy. Fun fact though, this is actually the only time you get a Rumble/Frenzy model that has both his hands on him, as Frenzy had a weapon taking the place of his right hand, and Rumble naturally had his two pile drivers. But yeah, there really isn't much more to mention about him than that. Well, we have two more skeletons to go, and they are both an iconic enemy from Fall of Cybertron, each with a faction-specific variation, those being the Snipers. First up, we have the Decepticon Sniper. This strange Cyclops Cylon appears most prominently in Chapter 5, Cut and Run, but is featured before that in Eye of the Storm and later in other levels. The Decepticon Sniper is made of entirely unique parts, and differs quite a bit from your standard character, as there are no hands or feet for this model since he is made to fly and hook onto walls. But nonetheless, this rig is completely compatible with all the other FOC characters. There isn't a whole lot I can say on him, really. Well, we only have one more skeleton left, so let's zoom in for the kill and finish this off. Closing it all off, we have the Autobot Sniper. So this guy, believe it or not, is actually primarily made from the Autobot Flyer, with just trace pieces of the Decepticon Sniper thrown in for good measure, mainly just around the chest. And though he is based mainly on the Flyer, it is not as straight of a port as you may think. His head is, well, flat out gone, and in place of it are some reused samples of the Autobot Flyer's armor, some of which I don't quite recognize. He may have received a completely unique set of parts for his design, but don't quote me on that. The chest is a composite of the Decepticon Sniper's chest with bits of the Autobot Flyers thrown in. He's also got some new rear thrusters made from the Flyer's rear flaps, and interestingly enough, the Flyer's rear armor has been moved around to the front to make it a bit more distinctive. His shoulders are slightly slimmer versions of the Flyer's, with the rear flaps noticeably removed. The arms are actually straight-up duplicates of his knee armor. Not often you see a leg part swapped over an arm for an FOC, but I suppose if it works, it works. Speaking of the legs are way leaner compared to the Flyer's, with the boosters on the back completely gone, and there only being one toe on the foot compared to two. So yeah, there's way more differences between this guy and the Flyer than I previously thought. Well, that about sums up the Autobot Sniper. Let's wrap it up. And there you have it. We've covered the majority of every single character part and Skelmesh in the game. Notice, however, I didn't say all. That's because there are a couple standout characters who I felt deserved their own video. One of these characters has been sadly neglected in the game, despite having a fully finished model for both modes. That is the character I want to cover next time, as I think he deserves at least that much. But we'll save that for next time, for when we trudge through the sludge. Till then...
Wouldn't want to be